Hi, I'm Justina from Just Classical, and today I'd like to talk to you about one of the many areas in which music study brings benefits into our lives and our children's lives. Music is an amazing tool and gift in our lives. So today, let's talk about how music enhances history study. When we study music appreciation, whether it is listening to classical music or music of other genres, we can learn about history and culture too. You see, through music study, we connect with others across centuries and cultures, especially when music is studied or music study is paired with history. So now I'm going to take you on a little tour of music history with orchestra music, but I'm not going to stay there. I have a couple different courses. One is the Composer Detective, where we study orchestral music, and I have another course, which is American music, which is American songs that you can learn patriotic songs to sing. So let's start with the orchestral music and how studying music can enhance history. For example, pre-Renaissance European music is mostly something called Gregorian chant. Because after the fall of Rome, the Catholic Church was the main power and influence in the Middle Ages, and so it controlled the art and music. The monks of the Catholic Church sought to live simple lives, and thus their music is these simple tunes sung in unison in worship to God. Later, during the Renaissance, music includes small groups of instruments and singers, such as minstrels who traveled and performed to live. Now, this is the pre-orchestral eras, but now the orchestral era of music begins in the 1600s in what we call the Baroque era, which is about 1600 to 1800 or 1600 to 1750. And the music contains frills and trills reflecting the style of the time of decorated dress and wigs. When we listen to For Unto Us a Child is Born from George Friedrich Handel's oratorio Messiah, we understand the frivolous nature of the Baroque era. It will make sense why there are multiple notes for one word, right? Music of the classical era, next, is known to be orderly and structured. So this may be why many people suggest listening to the music of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a classical era composer. And they say it's helpful when studying. When we examine the historical context of another classical era composer, Ludwig van Beethoven, we can bring more meaning and interest to his compositions. Beethoven lived at the same time as Napoleon and viewed him as a hero of democratic ideals. And so he originally dedicated his Symphony No. 3, Heroic, to Napoleon. But when Napoleon declared himself emperor, Beethoven tore the page in half and instead dedicated the symphony to his patron. Romantic era music is characterized by the unabashed expression of emotion. So, if you listen to the symphonies of Johannes Brahms or Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, knowing they are Romantic era composers, you will understand why you find yourself on an emotional, introspective ride through the music. Then there's the modern era, from about 1900 to present, and it's filled with musical innovation and breaking the rules of the structure of the previous eras. So if you listen to Claude Debussy, Igor Stravinsky, or Philip Glass, you may say, I don't like classical music because the sounds are so disjointed. But a ballet about a maiden dancing herself to death in a sacrificial ritual, which is what Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring is about, should sound chaotic and dissonant. So the music does reflect the topic, and we can only appreciate this with the historical context. So music should be connected to history, and it enhances the study of each historical era. So that's a summary of history in regards to classical music. and you will be able to dig into some of this in my music appreciation course, The Composer Detective. For more about that, I will put a link in the comments, and I recommend you find my Facebook Live from May 25th, where you get a peek into how the composers and music can come alive. Well, what about the common songs? Do those teach us about history? Absolutely. I will focus on American folk songs and patriotic songs as an example. That's right. These kind of songs tell us a story to connect us to history, and everyone loves a good story. For example, did you know that Yankee Doodle was a well-known tune in Europe for years before the 1700s? There are many different sets of lyrics that go with the tune, and in America, the British first sang versions of the song to mock the unkempt, disorderly colonial men, or Yankees, as they began to call them, who served with them in the French and Indian War. The British thought of the American soldiers as lacking class and education, and who thought they were stylish simply by putting a feather in their caps. The Yankees defiantly began to add their own verses to mock the British soldiers and turned the song into one of national pride. So the terms used in the song are more than just a child's rhyme. As I said before, Yankee was a term of the American colonial men Yankee was a term for the American colonial men used by the British. In the Civil War, it was a term used by the Southerner to refer to the Northerners. And today, people from New England states are called Yankees. So it's changed over time. But back then, it was about the American colonial men. Now, doodle, Yankee Doodle, doodle means a fool or simpleton. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. So macaroni was a fashion wig in the 1770s, and that was popular with the upper class men in Europe. So usually men who wore these wigs were excessively concerned with fashion. And then a dandy is a kind of similar term for someone who would be concerned with fashion. It's a term for a man who values refined clothing and appearance, language, and hobbies as if he were an aristocrat, even if he isn't. So such a man would wear a feather in his cap, for example. So this is a great history lesson, and the song tells a story of the Yankees and their fight against the British in the war for American independence and their views of each other before the war and during the war. It became a patriotic song. Well, then there's the story of the Star-Spangled Banner, America's national anthem. It was written by Francis Scott Key in 1814 during the War of 1812, which took place over a few more years than just 1812, but it's called the War of 1812. And that involves Napoleon and the French and the British, as well as America. So this is also at the time that Beethoven wrote his Third Symphony. So in America, near the Baltimore Harbor, in September of 1814, Francis Scott Key, who was a lawyer, had boarded a British war vessel to negotiate the release of a friend, Dr. William Beanes. The British agreed to release the friend, and they returned to their ship, but the British kept them under guard because the British were about to attack Fort McHenry in the Baltimore Harbor. So they could not allow Francis Scott Key and Dr. Beanes to leak the news. So on September 13th, 1814, the British began their barrage of Fort McHenry with shells and rockets for 25 hours. The soldiers at Fort McHenry defended the fort by shooting cannons at the ships. Francis Scott Key watched from his ship and was sure the British would win. But instead, in the dawn's early light of September 14th, he saw the broad stripes and bright stars of the Star-Spangled Banner yet waving. The Americans had won the Battle of Baltimore and kept Fort McHenry in their possession. Now there's more to this story. Francis Scott Key immediately Yes, while still on the ship, wrote this 4-verse poem, which he called Defense of Fort McHenry. And later, he set it to an already popular English tune by John Stafford Smith. Though officially used in the United States Navy as early as 1889, the United States Congress officially made the Star-Spangled Banner the national anthem in 1931. They used other songs for a while, like America the Beautiful, My Country 'Tis of Thee, Hail Columbia, until then. All right, so the flag that Francis Scott Key saw was a flag with 15 stripes and 15 stars. It was made by Mary Young Pickersgill of Baltimore, along with her daughter, 3 nieces, an indentured servant, and her mother, working 10-hour days for 6 weeks. It was a very large flag, measuring 30 by 42 feet, and each star is 2 feet in diameter. She also made a smaller flag, which they called a storm flag, which is the flag that flew during the battle. Only in the morning, after the battle had been won, was the Star-Spangled Banner raised. Major George Armistead, who was in command at Fort McHenry at the time of the battle, kept the Star-Spangled Banner. It passed through his family and was eventually acquired by the Smithsonian Museum. Now, over the years, it grew quite tattered, and pieces were missing that people had cut off as souvenirs. The Smithsonian restored the flag, and it is now on display in the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. And my family had the chance to see that. It's pretty cool. So the story of the song brings history to life. And think of all the times you've heard it and the memories the song as you sing it elicits now. Then there's the story of Catherine Lee Bates seeing Pikes Peak and writing America the Beautiful, and George M. Cohan writing You're a Grand Old Flag after meeting a Civil War veteran who had fought at Gettysburg, who carried a ragged old flag that was carefully folded, and he said of it, "She's a grand old rag." And he changed it to Grand Old Flag to be more respectful. And how about the songs of the enslaved Africans, spirituals meant to give them hope and lighten their work? Those teach us a lot about history too. Or the Marine Hymn, referring to the shores of Tripoli and the Barbary Wars. All of these songs tell a story and of history and share a worldview. So whether we study the songs themselves for this look into history or include songs of the historical period we are studying, music enhances history study. And you know what other benefits there are from including music in history study? If you take the time to learn and sing these songs, it will promote emotional well-being. Patriotic songs stir emotions and a sense of loyalty, pride, thankfulness for one's country. And singing these songs is also active learning to develop the brain. Want the active learning, got to develop the brain. So, music appreciation is so important for continuing development and learning, in connecting to the stories of history and culture and worldview, in promoting emotional well-being, in keeping the brain engaged, and so many more areas. Do you want to dig deeper into music appreciation? Do you want to include it in your homeschool, but you're not sure where to start? Well, check out our music appreciation course, The Composer Detective. That's where we study classical music and composers, specifically orchestral music. Or learn patriotic American songs in the course America the Beautiful. I highly recommend passing on our American cultural heritage by learning these American songs. More details are in the comments. So, thanks for listening. Now go out and enjoy some music.